Hello, you are
Hello.
here with Designing Healthy Environments. My name is Alicia Ponce, and I am the founder and principal of APMonarch. We are architects and sustainability consultants designing healthy environments. And here we have Josina Morita. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning, Alicia. We're good.
It's so good to see you. And I am excited to, talk about water reuse. But before we get started, I'm going to introduce you to talk a little bit about you to our audience. So Josina Wing Morita is a commissioner of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. Elected in 2016, she is the first Asian American elected to a countrywide board in Cook County, the second largest county in the country. As an urban planner and policy advocate, Josina brings expertise in equity policy, land use, stormwater, and regional planning. So we're going to be talking about what you have been doing since you have been elected. Exciting. She is a founding chair of the Asian American Leader Caucus. She sits on the National Blue Ribbon Commission for On-Site Non-Potable Water Systems and the Binational Great Lakes Commission. Josina's human rights, racial justice, and water justice work has been recognized locally and nationally. In 2007, she was named one of the top 35 leaders under 35 fighting racism and poverty in Chicago by the Community Renewal Society. In 2013, she received the Emerging Leader Award from the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform and the Breaking Barriers Awards from the Chicago Foundation for Women. In 2016, she was named one of the 50 Young Asian American Stars in Politics by Asian Fortune magazine. In 2017, she receives a Spirit of the River Award, and in 2019, she was named number 22 of the 40 people who made a difference in the last 40 years by Friends of the Chicago River. And in 2018, she was recognized as a National Water Hero by Water Now. She holds a BA in Sociology and International Race Relations from Pitzer College and a master's in urban planning and public policy from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Wow.
Always weird to hear your bio read.
For you, but not for the rest of us. And, let's give it up for Josina. And especially we're celebrating Women's History Month. I mean,
Yes.
How appropriate is that? So first of all, thank you so much for all the work that you do, the advocacy that you do around water. Facing what I'm looking at is, we're facing a climate crisis, right? And so, but I'm a firm believer that we have the tools and the resources to, to be able to live cohesively and coexist with nature, right? We have the technology, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Josina, tell us about what you're up to or with water use.
Sure. I mean, I think your audience probably more than the average person knows about Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, but just a little quick background. I always say we're the most important agency that nobody knows exists. We're a $1.2 billion agency that covers storm and sewer water for all of Cook County, like you said, which is the second largest county in the country, about 10 million people. We have a huge tunnel and reservoir system, the largest infrastructure project in U.S. history, that's still under construction. But even when that's completed, the deep tunnel project, it'll still hold about the equivalent of half an inch of rain on the county surface, right? When we started designing these things decades ago, we were planning for these 100-year storms that were supposed to happen every 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now they happen multiple times a year. And so like you said, we are facing a climate crisis in terms of the number of storms, the intensity of storms, The amount of impermeable surface on the county's, area, older aging infrastructure that doesn't necessarily have the capacity to hold these kind of storm capacities. We talk about building these huge reservoirs to hold stormwater, but if we have really kind of old and small infrastructure to get it there, I would say it's like trying to get a bucket to another bucket through a tiny straw. And so there's been a lot of investment in that, which needs to continue. But we also know that we kind of can't dig our way entirely out of the situation. And so we've been focusing on a lot of on-site capture strategies, including green infrastructure. We have our watershed management ordinance that's been updated that includes stormwater trading, which is a little bit more of an innovation right now. And then, one thing that I've talked a lot about, I grew up in California under drought conditions. And so moving to Chicago and the Great Lakes region and seeing how much we take it for granted, I think that there is a lot of work to do on what you want to talk about, which is water reuse, both on the behavioral side, on the consumer side, but also on the, large scale industrial users and things like that. So there's water conservation, but there is also a huge amount of potential when it comes to water reuse.
And that's what I'm excited about. I mean, yeah, coming from California, I bet it's frustrating. I always think about that because if it's not, I mean, we have Lake Michigan, right? And so it's not a pressing issue to us. So we're not going to worry about that right now, not until it's like, okay, it's getting desperate here. But we want to be able to prepare, for the future and for now, actually. And so as architects, we want to be able to push the envelope and look at strategies on these water reuse. Can we, harvest rainwater? What are our opportunities there? And also, what are our challenges? That's what I look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the Great Lakes, we're right on Lake Michigan. It looks like an ocean. We feel like it's ours. Yeah. But it is something, the Great Lakes we share with multiple states, but also Canada. And it's 90% of the US water supply, 20% of the world's fresh surface water is in our backyard. So not only opportunity, but I really think about responsibility, right? We have a huge responsibility, not just to those in Illinois, but to the entire region, to the entire country, and really to the entire world in terms of how we protect this natural drinking water source that is so necessary for human civilization. And like you said, I think it is a bit of human nature to not deal with problems until they're, so extreme that we're going to die. And so I always kind of have this debate with different people. Some people think, oh, we don't have a supply problem in Chicago. But I would argue if you look at population growth, if you look at the amount of water that people are consuming per day, we consume over 100 gallons per day on average in the region, while other countries are less than half of that. That when you look at what our fair share of that water should be in a long-term trajectory, that we do have a supply problem, and we also just have a responsibility. And so there's a lot of work to be done around water conservation. Every World Water Day, which is coming up March 22nd, I launched a campaign called the Million Gallon Challenge. And it's a challenge for people to reduce their water footprint. So just like people talk a lot about carbon footprint, there's a lot of really simple things that people can do. I think sometimes environmentalists, we focus on like, oh, take a short shower, put a bucket in your shower and water your plants. And while for those who are willing to do that, that's fantastic, but you're saving maybe 10 gallons of water at a time. But by eating chicken instead of beef for one meal, you can save 500 gallons of water. Wow. By not buying that extra pair of jeans, you can save over 1,000 gallons of water. And so the Million Gallon Challenge gives you 20, very easy things that you can do, that you commit to do. We work with schools. We're working with Shed Aquarium this year on this. Last year, World Water Day, we saved 1.4 million gallons of water in one day. And so it's just showing how possible that is. To little behavioral changes can have a big impact. And then like you're talking about, particularly from an architectural standpoint, and for me as an urban planner, is what opportunities we have of larger scale, right? Who are our largest water users and how do we change their behavior to be able to save even larger, amounts of water. And like you said, technology has changed dramatically. People think of
Right.
waste.
And it'll continue to change, and I
As it
think we
should.
should put it into, think about it as mention, this is potable water. Like, what are the technologies that we can reuse water to make it potable, right? Because each time we use it, it's this is potable water we're talking about. And you know, you're earlier you mentioned in our earlier conversations, you mentioned of a pilot program, right? And like, that is exciting. Can you talk
Yes,
about this
I
pilot
know it's one of
program?
my favorites. And so like you said, potable water, but I also really try to also emphasize to people to think about the spectrum of water, right? I think we're very binary in this country where we think of good water and bad water. So potable water is good water, everything else is bad water. But I say there's, in that everything else category, there's wastewater, of course, kind of, and toxic water, black water on the extreme end, but there's gray
Right.
water, there's rainwater, there's storm water, and each of them has their own end use that matches their water quality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that we have to use potable water for everything is really a false concept. And it's incredibly wasteful, not just of water, but incredibly wasteful of energy. The majority of energy we use in this country is to treat, move, and it is around water maintenance. And so it also reduces our carbon footprint in a lot of different ways too by changing this. And so, for instance, stormwater can be used for, landscaping. It can be used for irrigation systems. It can be used for, a lot of different end uses, car washing, things like that. And then even taking the worst kind of water that people think of like wastewater, we treat at our O'Brien plant just down the street from where I am here in Skokie. We disinfect, we do tertiary disinfection, and the water that we re-release back into the Chicago River is cleaner than river water. I think I told you we made beer from it 2 years ago, Chicago's first effluent beer. And it was so clean that we actually had to put things back into the water in order to make beer. So you can take, again, the dirtiest water that people can think of and take it to the highest endpoint. Orange County in California actually takes treated wastewater and bottles it and sells it as bottled water. I have some at my house. I've drank, I drank it. I remember when I went to DC, I brought it for Senator Durbin and Senator Duckworth to drink. And it tastes and looks, it is potable water.
Is there hesitation, like thinking about our behaviors, right? Is there like, I don't know, was there hesitation or?
For me, no, because I know the science, right? I think for the average person, just the concept of something that used to be wastewater is, a little squeamish. That's part of why I made beer out of it, because I feel like, beer is seen as a little bit more gritty, right? People kind of, and it's also very Chicago, to have a beer, and so I thought it was a good way to ease people in to the drinking treated wastewater over just straight drinking water. And it was something that we were able to do in our own capacity here in Chicago. So I think there is a little bit of a barrier, but that's why, thinking of fun ways like, beer as a way to introduce people to the concept that you can drink this treated wastewater. And like you said, there's so much opportunity. So for us at MWRD, we treat wastewater. It's not up to potable standards, but it's much cleaner than river water, for example. And that's the kind of water that can be used for manufacturing, again, for landscaping. In California, they use it for cooling towers. It can be used at airports, for airplane washing, de-icing. It can be used at their fire facility that they have at O'Hare. So one, there's a huge amount of opportunity, partly because of the huge amount of industrial in the two major airports that we have in Chicago. And then the location of our plants is actually along those industrial corridors. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for partnership between our plants and the two airports, Midway and O'Hare, are both near two of our plants, as well as a lot of the industrial companies. So the pilot that you were talking about, there's a tire making company called Koppers right next to our Stickney plant that's expressed interest. We haven't gotten it off the ground yet, but has expressed interest in using treated wastewater from our Stickney plant over potable. Just one pilot at this one tire manufacturing company, they're looking at taking 1 million gallons of non-potable water a day. So they're saving 1
Wow.
million gallons of drinking water a day
Got
in a
goosebumps when you
pilot.
said that.
1 million gallons a day, that's
Yeah.
365 million gallons a year. 3 pilots, just 3 pilots could get us to 1 billion gallons of water a year. So to think about the opportunity of scale, I think a lot of times when people think of water reuse, they think about, toilet flushing, and smaller scale opportunities, which I think are really important in California. They do a lot of laundry to landscape, residential toilet flushing. I think that's all very important, but not as accessible for the average person, and also not having the scale. And so it's a kind of all of the above strategy, but those scaled up industrial opportunities, golf courses for irrigation, public parks for irrigation, again, airports for de-icing. There's actually other models across the country where they take the non-potable water, they de-ice the planes, and then they take that de-icing liquid and they actually sell it because it's a good starter for windshield wiper fluid. So
Wow,
it's actually it's also getting a lot of those other contaminants out of the system, but also into an end use that matches their water quality.
amazing. Josina, I have a question here from a beloved CPS teacher, Tiffany Childress Price. She's actually happens to walk into our talk here on break. She's teaching right now. I happen to be on break with my first period, and my chem class is talking about TDS in water and Chicago's water quality. So she is teaching this right now in
That's
vivo.
awesome, Tiff.
Hi, Tiffany. Thank you for tuning in. We have another question here. Catherine alias, why is the treated water cleaner than river water?
I mean, one, unfortunately, because our river water is not the cleanest. I think people, may or may not know the history of the Chicago River. We used to put raw sewage into the Chicago River. Dead animals, people probably are most familiar with Bubbly Creek. It's not normal for a creek to bubble. And so there's huge amounts of sediment, there's huge amount of contaminants, and until we fully solve a lot of our stormwater problems, there are still combined sewer overflows where we do have to re-release our combined storm and sewer water into our waterways and into Lake Michigan. And so there are still a lot of challenges and problems around stormwater and protecting our waterways in Lake Michigan. And it's also a living body, right? And so it's not that it's necessarily even unclean, it's just not potable. And so the water that we take out of our treatment plants goes through multiple processes, including a final ultraviolet is our tertiary disinfection, where it goes through ultraviolet light to kill the last layer of bacteria. And so that's what we release back into the river. So partly because it's coming from a contained environment where it's being filtered and treated, it's a lot cleaner than river water, which parts of it are dirty, and there is still a lot of work to get our waterways to be recreational, but part of it's also, again, just the natural life cycle of some of our waterways with living things in it, plants, animals, and things like that. But
yeah,
to that
and
point,
I think that's what concerns people is, the health aspect too, that gets very sensitive. And so I believe that our approach needs to be, with very much in mind with health, right? Because, if we start talking about, oh, we're going to collect rainwater or we're going to store water. And then, we run into, well, what happens with Legionnaire's disease, right? When we're looking at reusing water for our cooling towers. So that comes up, and this is where we really want to push the envelope and make sure that it is safe, that it is healthy, and it's a learning process.
It is, and like you said, it is very much a public health issue, right? And so all permits currently in other states, as well as Illinois, it goes through public health, and that's who would regulate this kind of process. And to give some context, currently in Illinois, we don't have a standard process to certify non-potable water systems. Basically, you're required to flush your toilet with drinking water. You're required to wash your car with drinking water. There is a special permit process that you can go through. You actually have to get permission from the governor and you can submit your plan for a non-potable. So there are over 60, I believe, currently
Okay.
permits of non-potable water systems in Illinois, but there isn't a clear process in which, here's a plug and play, here's standard A for residential toilet flushing, here's standard B for water quality that need, here's storage, kind of standards and things like that. Because like you said, water is a very dangerous thing when not treated properly. And so things like standing water, temperature, flow, all of those things are incredibly important. And that's also why, another reason why I think a lot of the industrial end uses are, both they have the scale, but they also have the ability to be regulated by professionals
Right.
in a way that it's harder to regulate residential toilet flushing systems, right? That takes, an average homeowner who may, not have any kind of technical background, and who may forget to change a filter or, all these different things that could happen. Having it in a more professional contained environment is, I think, a good place to start.
Yeah. What about in terms of equity, Josina? That this is where we can also look at, how is water reuse and equity? How are you looking at that through that lens?
I mean, access to water is a human rights issue. It's an equity issue. I think, we think of people not having access to clean water as this third world issue that's over there, right?
Mhm.
But it happens here in Illinois. It's happened in other places, most famously in Flint. And we look at the water quality issues that are happening in Houston right now. But there are still huge parts of Cook County in Illinois that are still on well water. There are areas that have privatized their water and had a number of issues with water quality, particularly in the south suburbs. So these issues are very much at home, happening here. And it is absolutely an equity issue because it is, of course, the lower income communities that don't have the infrastructure investments and improvements to, one, protect their water source, but also, have been, in my opinion, sometimes preyed upon by some of these private companies and lured into privatization to fix short-term fiscal problems over long-term kind of water quality and quality of life issues. And so it's a difficult thing. I don't think that it's a blame thing. I just think it's a reality. And I think, for people like me and government, it's our job to proactively look at these inequities and figure out how do we play a role in being proactive and filling those gaps. Like, for instance, we're in the process of shifting one of our stormwater projects. We used to take shovel ready projects, right? So we basically say, okay, municipalities across Cook County, if you have a stormwater project that you want us to help support, give us a shovel ready plan. And that sounds nice, right? It sounds easy because, okay, we don't want to interfere with municipalities if they don't want it done. They come up with their ideas that fit their local needs. But at the end of the day, when you take a step back and you look at the municipalities in Cook County, not all municipalities have the capacity to even develop a shovel ready project, right? I mean, a lot of municipalities are in a place where they're lucky if they have a roads and bridges person, let alone a stormwater person or a water person or a planner. And so they don't necessarily have the capacity to be developing shovel ready plans. And so we're funding projects to largely wealthier communities, and kind of leaving a lot of communities that actually have the highest need off the table. And so shifting how we approach as government, how we make our investments, how we make these decisions, and filling some of those gaps in capacity, I think is an important role for us.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh. And we couldn't be luckier to have somebody like you to advocate for that. And that's what, my area of interest is too, is that when we plan for water reuse and this infrastructure and other areas, now there's a push for decarbonization, a serious push. And my voice is to say, well, how is this equitable, right? Let's really look at the big picture, right? But because we know that communities of color are in areas where the air quality is bad, the water quality is bad, and so now that we're talking about this and planning for this, let's look at it through an equitable lens. Let's do this right? Because like you, we believe that everyone has a right to a space that brings them comfort and joy.
Yeah.
Simply that. And what is that? Access to water, access to healthy air. I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and ask you about land use as
Yes.
well, and this exciting things you're doing with land use as the second largest landowner, right?
We are the second largest landowners in Cook County, right after the Cook County Forest Preserve. And as we know, throughout the history of this country, land is a huge issue. Access to land and, access to green space, things like that. And as an urban planner and architects, right, a lot of times we talk about what is the highest and best use. And I think, part of building equity into questions of land use is reevaluating how we think about highest and best use, right? That it's not necessarily where you can build the tallest building and make the most profit. It is what is the kind of the vision for the community. Like we look at the example of the Burnham plan right here in Chicago, that if that hadn't been part of his vision, that highest and best use meant protecting the lakefront, what would Chicago look like right now? Right? Many could say, oh, you could have made millions of dollars off of that property. But what is the value to the civic life, to the health, and kind of lifestyle of Chicago? It's a huge part of the identity, a huge asset for the city of Chicago to have that. But that took foresight, and it took taking a step back and thinking about highest and best use in a different way. So, I mean, I think that's one thing. The other that we've been looking at, and being in Little Village, a community that I've worked a lot with, right? You guys had the least amount of green space per capita as a community, a huge amount of industrial and things like that. So also thinking proactively about land use. How do we protect green space? How do we create green space in communities in particular that don't have it, right? And I think oftentimes we look of this model of large parks and things like that. I know Little Village has really embraced the model of pocket parks. So also working with communities and community residents and what fits their vision of their community, what fits their lifestyle culturally, in terms of accessibility, things like that. And so part of what I've been working on, there is a great model that MWRD did with in the 47th Ward around Irving Park and Ashland or Western area, where MWRD had a small plot of land that didn't have a real use in terms of a renter or lease or anything like that. It was like less than an acre along the river bank, kind of surrounded by residential. And we found a creative way, because we're not allowed to kind of give land to nonprofits or communities, but through MOU with a public entity, with a local governmental entity, that parcel that was being unused, that was costing taxpayers because we were maintaining it, didn't have a real kind of benefit to the community or to the water environment. We were able to create a partnership with the Riverbank Neighbors, which was kind of a neighborhood association in that area, where they then turned it into a native plant area, a path along the river. A lot of the schools come annually and do water testing. It really is just a place that communities, particularly young people, come and engage with the river. And so it's a really great model. And I was like, that's great that we have that there on the north side, but where else can we do it? Where else is it needed? But where else is it possible, particularly in communities of color? So we've been doing a land use audit, looking at all of our MWRD properties that might be viable for partnerships like that. We're trying to relook at our land use policy. We actually have a study session at MWRD at the end of the month if people want to join to give input on what our land use policy should look like. And part of that is proactive community space to me. Part of it's also how do we regulate industrial users in different ways? How do we open up our agricultural land use processes? Our agricultural land leases are currently 1 year, which makes it really hard for people to plan and invest in the land. And then some of our other leases, in my opinion, are a little bit maybe too long with industrial users along the river, and thinking about how do we shorten some of those leases and increase accountability and standards to protect that land and protect our waterways. But, I'm really excited about the idea of expanding that riverbank neighbors model to the south side, to the south suburbs, so that there are those places where you can engage along the river. There is something different about a culture of like growing up as a young person and being able to touch nature,
Oh yeah.
right? For those of us who live in the city, again, people kind of turn away from the river, right? It's something that you kind of have this stigma around, that it's gross and it's dirty. And that has been the history, but we're working to clean it. And part of what that's going to take is engaging the next generation and really like loving the river and investing in the river.
It definitely, creates an impact. That's the way I grew up, close to nature, access to nature. And this is what I'm doing. This is what I dedicate my life to, and I enjoy it. So I see Juan Calajorano. Hi, Juan. Thank you for signing in. He's with ASIA. He's a fan of designing healthy environments. Talk about taking action, Josina. You are doing amazing things, and we're lucky to have you, on the forefront of green infrastructure, your reuse policy, like that's where we can push the envelope, right?
Yeah, and for you all as architects, I see your platinum signs behind you. It's a tool that is just not available in our toolbox in Illinois, right? Mm-hmm. So when you talk about platinum certification and these different things, it's also another tool for design, and to exactly your point of designing healthy environments. And it's something that people are doing around the country, people are doing around the world. It's illegal to flush your toilet with drinking water in Hong Kong, right? So it's how I think that there's some challenges. It's not just as simple as saying we should do it, but I think it's a problem worth putting some time and energy into solving.
Oh, definitely. And we're here to do it. We're here to work with you, and excited to work with you, and to be able to one day have, flush our toilets with, treated water, not potable water, right? I think it's possible. Yeah. We're doing it. They're doing it in California, right?
And sit back and have a sip of effluent beer.
Or beer and celebrate, right? For our victory.
Carb sandwich. Yes.
So I'd like to thank you so much for joining me. I could talk to you for many more hours on this. We are happy to have you and talk about all of the proactive, actions that you're taking. Thank you again. I'm like speechless. Like my mind is really running here with so much hope, and the fact that you pointed out that these platinum, certificates back here, it's not just APMonarch, right? It really takes a team. It really takes the key stakeholders, the owners, to really believe that it's possible. And it is. And so I think that we are here. We live in a great city with wonderful sustainability professionals of all industries, and we can build this way so that we're not rushing, like say, in an emergency like Texas, right, where it was an awful situation. We want to get to the point where, we do have a peace of mind, and be in our home or in our workplace and say, I'm not, emergencies happen, but I'm taken care of, right?
Yeah, that's an important point too. I feel like I became an urban planner because of Katrina, right? We saw this hurricane happen and everybody said, oh, this awful natural disaster, which it was an awful natural disaster, but building an entire community of low-income Black people below a levee that hasn't been invested in is not a natural disaster. That is a man-made disaster. Mm-hmm. And it's up to people like us. And, again, thank you for the work that you do to engage in these conversations. Because I think architects, just like urban planners, we're problem solvers, right? But we have to be asking the right questions about what kind of problems are we trying to solve. And embedding those questions around equity are important to solving problems the right way without the unintended consequences of perpetuating inequities. And, so I think that distinguishing between natural disasters and man-made disasters are incredibly important in our field.
Yes, and we will. What a great way to just wrap it up. Thank you, Josina. Have a healthy week. And once this pandemic is over, we will continue to talk and drink beer with
Evelyn beer. I'll get you a bottle of that treated wastewater too.
Oh yeah, and I want to see a poll, start commenting after you watch this, who would drink the water? I mean, I would try it. If Josina did it, I would do it. And then see it's a ripple effect. So thank you, have a wonderful week, be healthy. Once again, I'm Alicia Ponce, founder and principal of APMonarch. We are architects and sustainability consultants designing healthy environments. Thank you.
Thanks.